I think there's a new generation. I think you're sitting in front of me. It's a new generation. You're used to storytelling in another way that my generation, I'm saying that because I think I'm like 15 years older than you. But I think the new generation has another access and a closeness to storytelling. But their challenge will be to navigate within that storytelling. Navigate against AI and what you're supposed to listen to and hear.
Smart city. What is it about? A livable city. How do we create it? Thank you so much for giving your valuable time to listen to Urbanistica podcast season number 2. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Don't forget to follow Instagram account to see the stories behind the scenes, and also subscribe the YouTube channel to see the live talks. Let's get in touch on LinkedIn, share your reflections with us, with Urbanistica community. Recommend the podcast to people you think are interested in Urbanistica topics. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. I'm looking forward to this episode because I'm meeting my digital friend, ERL. It's a great friend. I met her on LinkedIn and she started a really interesting vlog about the new society. And she started when it was the COVID-19 pandemic in the earlier of March. But today we're going to talk about why it's so important that architects tell a story. We're going to talk about architecture and storytelling. I have the pleasure to welcome Louise Sassene to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Mustafa. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, it's nice to have a meeting in real life finally.
Yeah.
2 meters apart.
Yes, exactly. We talked a lot actually when it was the corona and we become a friend in Microsoft Teams.
Yep.
So how do you feel now?
I feel good. I feel a lot of anticipation how we will handle this situation in the fall. I think it's an interesting time in many aspects. And storytelling is essential for the collective mind and also for us as individuals.
Are you fine with working digitally or you still love to come back?
I've just started a new job and we've been quite a few, not a few, but we've been a number of people at the office actually, not sitting closely, but it's been really great for me to interact with people from being on my own in my apartment for about 3 months. So yeah, I've handled it okay.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And by the way, thank you so much for coming here and for having the podcast in real life.
Yeah. Storytelling is what I like, and I think storytelling is essential for our role in building societies. So it's, of course, I would talk to you about it.
Yes. So you are our storyteller for this episode. Tell us about you. Tell us about your passion.
Well, I'm a mother. I'm a girlfriend. I'm an architect. I am also a cancer survivor. And I am the mother of Afro-Swedish children. So storytelling has been essential for me personally because growing up and raising Afro-Swedish children, you need more than a single story because they need to find themselves in the stories, to hear different kind of stories, not only about blonde, blue-eyed children. And I, as a cancer survivor, needed to hear stories about survival. Magazines and newspapers tend to prone into sad stories, and I needed to hear the survival stories. So from a personal point of view, I think giving a narrative which broadens perspectives is very essential. In terms of architecture, I feel we live in a having society, and we build societies, we create societies, and transmitting an image of the built environment in the future, and telling what we can help with because we as architects have a very spatial mind, and we are also looking into the future. I think that's very essential. Telling the story of the future city or the future society is very essential, because we can, with our voices and our stories, shape the future.
Yeah, very interesting journey. So you're surviving because of the storytelling that you were hearing and now you're telling.
Well, initially, I think most people feel, why would my story be interesting to tell? And I think it's very important not to judge yourself. And then if you're interested in something, or if you feel like you have a voice, which I think everyone should feel, you can always dive into new subjects or search within yourself of what your story is. But let the others, let the people around you be the judges if your story is interesting or not. And I think we are very privileged. We live in a very privileged part of the world where we have freedom of speech and where our voices can be heard. And I think it's a very essential right that we should cherish and take to heart. Very is essential, especially in our professional roles.
Yeah. As an architect, when you were studying, did you learn the storytelling or you learn it later now after, when you started to practice architecture?
Well, I grew up partly in Africa, and I got to know a plant expert, PhD, whose vision was to make the desert flourish. And he wrote letters to George Bush the older, Saddam Hussein at the time. This was in the late 80s, early 90s, to try to influence. And he was very influential in my life. I was very impressed with him. And I think already as a young architect at the architecture school, Word was my program, not AutoCAD or Rhino. I was a Word person. So I think the written word for me has always been to explain my vision, but I've also had a very social oriented approach to architecture, not into building fancy houses, more interested in how architecture can be beneficial for the poor or the less benefited people in societies. And so the written word has been a way for me to be influential and to raise questions and promote aspects of architecture that I think should be focused on already at the architecture school.
Already,
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
But why you think architects should tell a story? I mean, architects like always to be overall and take over everything. Why they should also tell a story, and how should they?
Well, I think architects, we want to draw, we want to design. What we miss and what we don't focus so much on is setting up the framework for our assignments, so that we are influential in terms of what we actually get to draw and what projects we actually are assigned to. So I think, for instance, I think Utopia is a company that has been very, the late Emma Jonstig was very influential. There are many other good architects and other researchers that may be more knowledgeable. But if you're unable to tell your story, if you're unable to transmit an image of what you want to create, then you're destined to do what others have thought and predicted and told you to do. So I think in terms of storytelling, I think architects I miss more storytellers within our profession in Sweden. I think more people should tell their input and their story in relation to the built environment. It's essential for the assignments we get. And also knowing, I think being knowledgeable of law and framework, jurisdictions in terms of what we get, the framework where we operate, but also question it. The different types of stories, the different types of input you can do. You can debate, you can just write essays, you can reflections. But I think a silent architect is useful for no one, honestly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So when architects get a project, it's with a limited budget. and then there's not amount of this time to reflect and so on. So from moving from one project to another project to another project. So how can an architect create a time to reflect?
I think I heard a lecture once when someone said, try to learn 5 new things a day. And I've learned from my own experience I just did a book on cancer with illustrations and text about my cancer journey, told from my perspective.
What's the name of the book?
It's called The Cancer Friend, Cancerkompisen, and Cancer was the publisher. So it's illustrations and text. And I think by doing so, you create your own narrative. I think by training your brain and doing something regularly, you can, because I did a drawing every day, 10 by 10 centimeters. You have that time. You have that time. Everyone has that time. We spend it on Instagram and Facebook. And if you give that time to yourself, if you reflect on things, like if you're interested, if you think something, read about it, do research, learn about it, prone into it. I think everyone has that extra time, but we just need to divert the time so it's beneficial for ourselves within our personal lives and our professional lives. So I think that's my message, really. I mean, try to focus on things that you want to learn more about, and don't be afraid that you're not fully knowledgeable. I think the risk you take is that somebody says, oh, you didn't do the research, or I don't agree, whatever. But I think it's a nerve you train, like drawing or sketching. You know, like if you maintain it, the time lap or the time frame you need to get back into the game it's not so big.
I believe no one was born with this magical knowledge or skills of writing things.
Yeah.
And also you remind me of a TED Talk about time management. So the speaker said that there's nothing called I cannot do that, I don't have time. Everyone have 24 hours. It's about prioritizing and time management.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, like if you put a little amount of time every day, then you learn these skills of.
But I have to admit, I'm a crap at time management. I always think that the day has some additional hours. And when I was a kid, I used to love waking up early, first of all, in the house. I would sit and do stuff, creative stuff in my bed, just because I felt like I had 2 extra hours before anyone else woke up. And I think that sort of stuck with me, that I have this imaginary to-do list, and I have a really hard time diverting from it. So time management is not where I have my black belt, but I get things done. I do. I do.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you do your storytelling? I know many architects are listening, many students are listening to the podcast. So it will be great to learn from you. What are your different tools that you tell stories?
I think storytellers that are interesting are people who tell stories from their heart. It has to be from within. My boyfriend is a former journalist, and he always says you write best when you don't think so much of the person who will read this or hear this. When it's heartfelt and when it's true to yourself. So I think one learning, one message is that don't go too far. Dig within. And from your personal experiences and where you're at work, if you're at work or at school, and your own reflections, because the personal story is authentic. So authenticity is really important when you're telling a story. I think Eminem is a great person to listen to, his texts, because one of the reasons I think people like him is because his texts and lyrics, they're out there. They feel very authentic. They feel very heartfelt. And that's how you grasp listeners. That's how you become interesting.
Yeah. And how do you do your storytellings? You had the vlog, LinkedIn. What are the different platforms do you use now?
Well, I'm on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and I also blog for the Swedish Architects Association.
Yeah.
And I think my scopes are different. Sometimes, like my last essay for the Swedish Architects Association was about Animal Crossing and how it became a phenomenon during the lockdown, because Nintendo just dropped it, and it was the what is it? What's the war game everyone plays? Fortnite for mums. Animal Crossing became Fortnite for mums. Thank you. During lockdown, and it's really interesting because you know that it playing it, you realize that this is about the built environment, and you behave just like explorers did back in the day. You get a new land, you learn how to cut down trees. Eventually, you've cut down all the trees, but you don't know how to plant new ones. You crossbreed flowers, you plant things, you create societies. It's really interesting because it sort of shows you what you are like as a person. Like, I get addicted to things easily, and two, basic human behavior. So that was an essay that I did, very personal. Before that, I've written about AI. Learning analytics, digital transformation within learning environments. So those are more factoid kind of essays that I do essentially to learn myself. And if somebody reads it and finds it interesting, good for them and good for me. But I sometimes write, honestly, for myself to explore and become more knowledgeable myself. Yeah.
You don't think this is selfish?
I think a multitude of storytelling is essential because I don't think in that sense that it is selfish. I think hearing a single story is more dangerous, or a single story told many times. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a Nigerian author. She has a really good TED talk about the danger of the single story. And I think, for instance, in terms of when you read about that only dark-skinned persons commit crimes and create problems, when you read that kind of story too many times, you start to believe it. And that sort of predicts the future and undermines a democratic society. So I think, of course, you need to balance what you write, but sometimes you need to be blunt, honest, and really personal to draw attention. So I think that is the advantage of freedom of speech. But I think many stories are crucial for a democratic society to be told.
Yeah. Is there anyone listening to the architects when you speak here, when you write in Sweden, let's say? Is the government, the municipality?
Well, I'm not a city planner. You are a city planner. But I wrote about the development of this downtown center for Stockholm. And that was also an essay for the Swedish Association blog, where I questioned what sort of asset the downtown area would become for somebody with just 100 crowns in the pocket. And you'd think that only architects read that kind of blog. But I was quoted in one of the biggest Swedish journals, Svenska Dagbladet. And they also made a remark that too little architects actually comment on the ongoing city plans in the urban areas. So I think if I, as a house architect, traditionally focused on learning environments and homes for the elderly, open my mouth and say something about the built environment in downtown Stockholm and foreign investors and what kind of environment you create there. I think if I get quoted in the biggest newspaper, that was not intentional for me, then anyone can be listened to. So I think even if you're a student or if you're retired or if you're, you need to have some self-distance. You have to realize that people may have different opinions and sort of, so I think self-distance is still essential, but not being afraid is also essential.
Yeah. And one of your tools that you're expressing yourself, the vlog, Det nya samhället, the new society.
Yeah.
Tell us about the background, the story of it.
Well, I think a lockdown provided us with a setup that was very punk. You know, it was like people who didn't know how to use the different tools, Teams and Zoom and breakout rooms for workshops and whatever program you've been using. It was new to us. And when something is new, it's always, we're a little bit more, we're kinder to the users and we're kinder to the format. So we started the vlog, me and Elise Grosse at Sweco and Björn Ekelund at Warm in the Winter, actually for some kind of brain gymnastics. And I think this punk environment, sort of no script, no noise reduction, no cutting of or editing, but just like our conversation and it was really obvious that we invited people to talk as well, interesting people from all over the world, from our own networks, not essentially architects, but biologists, statistics.
A nurse from the hospital.
She's a doctor, from central Manhattan. We had lots of different people reflecting on lockdown and corona, but we had no script and it was not edited. But what it was a training of a rapid conversation with essential, crucial reflections. And I think this brute and uncut, unedited and punk environment was very forgiving and very vibrant in a way, lively. And I think we should try to create more kind of I think architects are extremely disciplined. We want everything to be edited down to the, we censor ourselves to the extent that there's nothing left, like we're agile and we adapt to our clients' needs and everything, we reduce ourselves a lot. But I think if we're a bit more forgiving and open-minded, and I think the environments for communication, if it's the written form or if it's a pod or a vlog or whatever, I think if we are more forgiving, firstly to ourselves, then we will also be more forgiving to the others. And I think the corona and lockdown and COVID-19 now, well, what we call it, has provided a safe space for experiment. Because everybody wants to know what the future will be like. Everyone wants to hear how you've dealt with it. Everyone wants to know how it, we want to, I think it's part of the human mind. We want to know how to predict the future. We want to be in control, which is interesting because, speaking from my cancer experience, I know that anything can happen at any time. We're never safe. But I think that's sort of a superpower that, within this capsule that we are in now, we have a possibility to raise voices that we haven't heard before.
Yeah. Are you going to continue with the vlog?
Actually, I have a new project for my new agency, OVL Arkitekter. I can't be public about that yet, but I'm very eager to start it. It has also to do with communication, and it will be within my profession. So the vlog will come to an end, as I think some storytellings need to come to an end. I think also my cancer account will have to come to an end. I've been in that space for a long time. And there's a time and place for everything. And now I've got this new project which will also host storytelling, but not my storytelling. I will be the host.
Okay, I'm looking forward. It's going to be super interesting to follow. You're a really creative storyteller.
Thank you.
So, as you know, in this podcast, I talk a lot with my guest about what is a smart city and trying to explore what is it, the future city. So if I ask you, what is a smart city? How do you define it?
I think a smart city is a city that governs its own data. I think giving it away is dangerous in terms of democratic aspects. I think there's a huge potential. but everyone knows that we're, like, how do we make use of the data that our different devices and our communication tools and our transports and everything, mobility solutions, everything generate. But I think ownership is crucial. And I think, to me, the smart city is a city that serves its inhabitants in terms of making the most of the data generated for the people, not for international corporations like Google and Amazon. So I think ownership is essential. And I think that will be very interesting in terms of post-corona. We will have a deficit in our economies, and data is for sale. We will sell it out, or we will insist on keeping it and profit from it ourselves. So I think we have an interesting future, and we need to reflect on how we govern our ownership. So I'm going to write about that as well.
Yeah, you talked a lot about data ownership. Where are the architects from this smart city? Do you think architects?
I think we need to enhance processes and dialogues that generate data and input. Not everything is to be evaluated in numbers. I think we have other, should develop more ways of evaluating in terms of, and also I think architects can define the demand on the data sets. Why do we need digital technology? What do we want from it? Defining what we want from it. There, I think we have a crucial role as human beings, because, in respect to technologies, we're always human. We define what we need, and we will act the same. Just because something is available doesn't mean we use it the right way. So I think establishing processes and methods so that we can specify what we want and how it's to be used, like a user-friendly interface, is essential. And I think city planners and architects have a crucial role in defining what we want, what we need, how we need to work. But the written word and the spoken word will enhance it. And without us, I think that the Sidewalk Labs story from Toronto is a very good example of what we don't want. We don't want a third party to get hold of the data we generate. We want something from it ourselves. Yeah.
Do you believe Stockholm is a smart city, as the way you define a smart city?
I think I went to South by Southwest with 2 colleagues a year ago, and we were riding on Voice, like those mobility...
Electrical scooter?
Yeah, exactly. And it was really interesting because they give off GIS information. Is that how you say it in English? I don't know. The geographical information systems, yeah. So the lectures I went to were very much, when it was American lecturers who spoke, they said, well, soon we will know when the bus arrives. We will have digital interfaces knowing when the bus arrives and stuff like that. And I think in terms of being connected and having Wi-Fi and those kind of digital services, for society, I think it's extremely in terms of democracy. I think it's extremely important that they are governed and owned by the state, because in America, not everyone is connected, and public transport and information system regarding to that is far from equal and far from just. So I feel we need to know whom we're benchmarking against. If we compare ourselves to the States, yeah, we're very smart, very connected. If we compare ourselves to Estonia, well, maybe not so. But I heard another lecturer. He said, well, in Estonia we can vote, for the elections on an app, when you're having a shit on the toilet, but only 62% of the population vote, even though it's so accessible. So I think we have, getting back to storytelling, I think telling the story of what freedom of speech and justice and democratic societies, how important they are for the survival for the humankind and for our environment. I think it's extremely important, because even though technology is accessible, it doesn't mean it is beneficial for the humans. Our behavior is essential. And to change our behavior, we need to hear stories of how we change our behavior.
Yeah.
Good stories.
Yeah. Do you think we're going far in the future now? In 10 years, we are talking about Agenda 2030. We have just 10 years left. Do you think we're going to tell a good story? Are we going to make it and accomplish the...
I think in order... Really complicated question and big question. And earlier this summer, I listened to Greta Thunberg at Swedish Public Radio. When you hear her, I think you it's like a slap in the face. I think we need more slap in the face, really. But I think also post-corona, in terms of development, I think we need to tell the story of what kind of future we want. And we need to tell the story of what kind of solutions we as architects and planners can provide. So I don't think we are victims. I think we're responsible, and that we can change our future with the spoken word and our stories.
Yes, exactly. If I take you back in time with the time machine and you'll be allowed to change one thing out of architecture, urban planning and design point of view, what will you change in all the cities?
Well, I thought about it, and I think I don't look back. I think you can look back and learn things for the future. But having survived a really dangerous disease, I think I love the future. But I think we need to learn from the past. I think we need to remember the stories from the past, not to repeat the same mistakes. The Holocaust is one example, but I think also in terms of city planning, we don't need to reinvent everything always. I think there are a lot of ideas from the 70s in terms of social responsibility that we can sort of dust off and reinvent. But we need to know our history, and we need to know the stories from the past to create a better future. But I like the future. Every year is a bonus.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring. But Louise, why you're taking all this responsibility about storytelling? I mean, no one is paying to you, and why are you having all this, you know?
I think I as a human being, to be able to wake up and look myself in the mirror, I need to feel I made the most out of life. I had that since I was a child, but I think it's been accelerated since I was very sick. So I think my gratitude to life and my wish to inspire to give without necessarily having something in return is a very strong drive for me. So I think I owe it to my children to tell their story and to open them to other stories. I owe it to other cancer survivors to tell my story, because that's a way of making a outlook that I can also survive, even though this diagnosis that you have is shit. And I think as an architect in my profession, I'm not able to make change myself. But we as a collective can make change. And if I can add my little part to that sort of story, I think I need to do it. And I would say that there are others that participate and contribute much, much bigger and on a much better and bigger scale than I do. But I want to do the part I can manage. And it's finding the time, really, making it your priority and not being afraid. Really, that's my message to everyone who listens to this. Tell your story. Don't censorize yourself. Let the others around you be the judge if your story is interesting or not. And dig within your profession where you're at.
Wow, Louise, you're a real change maker. Thank you so much again for giving your time to record this podcast. I'm inspired by you every time we talk or I listen to you. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, and keep doing your thing. I think hosting this way is also a way, you're making an arena for stories, which is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. So how would you like to summarize this inspiring conversation, your reflections, and 3 takeaway messages to all the listeners?
Yeah, well, make your voice heard. There are different ways of doing it. Find yours. Learn new things. Don't think you need to be an expert, but be in the arena, because it's in the arena where you can make change. So those would be the 3 messages. And summarizing, I think there's a new generation. I think you're sitting in front of me. It's a new generation. You're used to storytelling in another way that my generation, I'm saying that because I think I'm like 15 years older than you. But I think the new generation has another access and a closeness to storytelling. But their challenge will be to navigate within that storytelling. Navigate against AI and what you're supposed to listen to and hear. But even more so important.
Very interesting reflection. I guess we need a whole new season to talk about this.
But listen to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie at the TED Talk. And Brene Brown, sociologist, is really good. She's a storyteller as well, storyteller.
Yeah, I will include the link in the description.
They're very inspirational.
The one you sent me.
And listen to Mustafa Sharif, Urbanistica podcast.
So give me 3 hashtags to the episode.
Be punk. Dare. Make change.
Make change. You know what, Louise? You're a badass architect.
Thank you. Have a great summer.
What is your summer plan? Did you plan for this summer?
Well, my children were supposed to go to their grandfather for a while, but he's so scared to meet us. And I said, well, we'll see each other in 3 years because we don't know when this will pass. But my boyfriend has an electrical car. We will drive around, make trips. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, wish you a really sunny and beautiful summer.
Thank you, you too.
And looking forward to your project after the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Please follow Instagram and subscribe the YouTube channel. If you have any great story that makes our city smarter, please contact me. Urbanistica has been produced in collaboration with Landskapslaget, that's working with landscape architecture, urban planning and design based in Stockholm, and also H22, Helsingborg City, the making of smarter city. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.